Oh, I should probably darken the screen a little bit because I have like YouTube in the background there, and this makes things kind of hard to deal with. There you go. Hello and welcome to the Streaming Parson podcast. And today, just gonna indulge a little bit on some love story related stuff, as next week is Valentine's, and I know you're probably thinking, oh, but why don't you just do that on Valentine's Day? You know, because Valentine's Day does in fact fall on a Monday, so it would work perfectly to do a Valentine's stream on Valentine's Day, which is probably what you're thinking. But if it isn't obvious, I won't be around for Valentine's Day. And I could just make a pre-recorded video and kind of do the whole love story talk thing then. But at the same time, I'm going to kind of use this stream to kind of do a continuation of what I did last week, because I realized last week I went on a weird tangent and then stuck with it. That wasn't actually what I originally planned for last week's video. But that's because when I thought about last week's video, I realized that some of the stuff I would have ended up talking about would have been, it would have been too cheeky, and I didn't want to do that on last week's podcast, so that's why I went the route that I did last week. But today I'll kind of do a weird continuation of last week's video, but focus more on the romantic side of the boy meets girl story. Because of course last week I talked about how one of the beauties of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is that it tells a girl meets boys, in this case a girl meets boys story, without it needing to be a love story. And I think one of the beauties of that's one of the beauties of the Snow White story, is that it does that very well. Especially how the Disney version really amps up the male side of that story. Because of course, traditionally, it is a much more, how do I put it? It's a more banal story of the virtues of womanhood. That's how the original Snow White story is told. But Disney kind of put an added dimension to it and talked about how the virtues of womanhood changes a man. And so that was kind of what I really talked about. That's what I ended up talking about more than the erasure of trying to keep stories accurate in their time. And so, with that said, today I'm going to move a little bit more beyond that whole Snow White talk, but I kind of want to use that as a springboard, because I did bring up something during that stream that, one, has been a huge kind of my flavor of the season, I guess, as well as other important themes within that. And so that's kind of why I wanted to bring up that little preface of stuff from last week and whatnot. So, for those of you who are joining us now and did not watch last week's stream, I'll give you the TLDR of it. So, a huge anime I'm into, I might as well just point out, a huge anime I'm into right now is My Dress Up Darling, or, well, that's the English translation. I'm not going to try and say the Japanese title because I know I'm going to butcher it, and then someone's going to come break my door down and be like, you butchering SOB. But no, I'm not. I'm gonna leave it at that. My Dress Up Darling is this anime, and I'll give a proper description of what it's about. And I figure I would talk about it because, one, I've actually really come to really like it, and my girlfriend and I, we've been watching that anime together, and we both love it. And one of the other funny things too is that we both love watching anime, especially anime rom-coms, because as I mentioned last week, and it's definitely true in my life, and I guess at this point I'm an anime character, but the reason why my girlfriend and I have come to love watching a lot of Japanese rom-coms is because even though, as I mentioned last week, Japanese rom-coms use the same, it's basically the same formula. They tell the same story over and over. They just, put little spins here and there of like where the setting is and some particular quirks within the male and female characters. Even though those things are slightly changed, the story itself is fundamentally the same. And it's usually the guy is the introverted one and the girl is the extroverted one. And they're they're two very different worlds meet, but then of course they find qualities within each other that awakens, the masculinity within the guy and femininity within the woman, and awakens these kind of things between them. And because of that, they, in most cases, and where Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is kind of the rebel of this genre of the boy meets girl, it's because the male and the female awaken these particular aspects of each other. That is also what draws them to each other, and hence love story ensues. And so, with that said, though, I always, and this is not just like, for example, like I said, the flavor of the season, if you will. The flavor of the season is My Dress Up Darling, so I will refer to that one quite a bit. But there are other Japanese anime rom-coms the two of us have really enjoyed watching. And a big part of it is because in most cases we see ourselves in it. That's the best way I can say it. We see ourselves in it. And usually, although there's some exceptions, usually it's the guy who's the introverted nerd. I mean, you guys seen my podcast, you guys have seen my Bible study videos, you guys know how much of a nerd I am. So, introverted nerd right here. And then meets the extroverted female character. Sometimes it's reverse, but once again, usually in anime, and of course in anime there's a particular reason for it. The reason for it is because now I know there's gonna get some hate for this, and it's one of those things that like the Japanese culture is very, very different in North American culture, and it's kind of ironic that you meet a lot of North Americans that would love anime, but of course they're not gonna. Well, see, this is where we're kind of going into like kind of dicey territory. Japanese culture is very antithetical to modern North American feminism. It's basically antithetical because Japan is all about tradition, whereas feminism is all about breaking tradition because tradition has always held people back, primarily women. And so those two things are not just different, but they're opposite. And so where in Japanese culture they're comfortable telling the same boy meets girl story, even though to a lot of modern North Americans, it would seem as a very backward idea. And so that's usually why. So with that being said, the reason why in a lot of these anime it's the guy who's introverted and the girl is more extroverted is because it does pander a little bit to the male fantasy of a lot of guys, especially Asian guys. And this is where I kind of laugh at myself that I'm basically an anime character, where a lot of Asian guys tend to be loners. They tend to be more to themselves. And of course, on top of that, when you add the boy meets girl element, the Asian male tends to not have a lot of his masculinity, if you will, kind of fostered. And so this is where, once again, the boy meets girl story really works in Japanese animation. And in having the girl be more extroverted and the boy be more introverted. And usually the story starts out with the female awakens that confidence in a man. She awakens that in him. And usually she awakens him first. Usually that she awakens that one him for the guy to have a lot more confidence, and usually this takes form in the male wanting he wants to somehow for simplicity purposes, because once again across anime this may take different forms, but fundamentally what the guy does is that he becomes someone that the woman can rely on, and he becomes the provider, if you will. And this is, of course, since the caveman days, that's how human beings have been structured, that the males provide for the females of the tribe, yada yada yada, and they take care of the physical labor so that they can one prove their strength and thus continue the evolutionary process by propagating their seed. That's how evolution works. And by extension, it the man proves to himself that he is useful, that he belongs to the tribe, because there's that interesting contrast, as I mentioned earlier, with in a lot of these anime and the Asian male experience. Men tend to be a lot more isolated. They tend to think that, no, I'm more of a loner. I just do things myself. And truth be told, that's something any guy can relate to. I easily relate to that. For a long time in my childhood and my early adult life, I had always felt like I had to do things myself. Even to an extent to this day, I still feel that I have to do a lot of things myself. I mean, one of the things that's just the way it is, but and I will admit it's frustrating to me that, for example, the streaming Parson channel, I feel like I have to do this myself. And as I've mentioned in past videos, I think I've told this story in a past podcast, but basically one of the reasons why the streaming Parson podcast exists and why the streaming Parson channel exists as a whole is because I'm trying to build an outlet to do ministry ultimately, but of course I do enjoy the philosophy talks, which is why the podcast exists. I enjoy philosophy talks. But ultimately, the channel first started out as me doing Bible studies on camera. And a big part of why the streaming Parson exists is because I wanted to be able to spread the gospel and do thorough Bible studies, which I believe is the best approach in my mind. Of course, some people have different approaches because not everybody is an hardcore academic like myself, so they don't treat spreading the gospel the same way as I do. And that's fine. But ultimately, this channel was about doing a ministry, and it came out of it first came out of a frustration. So before I was actually the streaming Parson on YouTube, I actually used to do this on another platform, and then that was way harder. But basically, even when I was doing it back on Twitch way back, and I would just read the Bible on camera kind of thing and do basically a live Bible study, it came out of not being able to find church work. And it wasn't just because of COVID, but even before that, it just, and it's one of those things that like when I say it out loud, you'll probably think it sounds really stupid, and to an extent it is. But I also understand why churches behave the way they do. And so what happened was when I just finished my master's degree, which, holy crap, it's weird to think that it's almost over 4 years since I graduated with my master's. And I was looking around to be a pastor at a church and to serve in that capacity. And church after church would just deny me that. They wouldn't, we're not going to take you, whatever. And of course, to be fair, to defend those churches, I'm not telling the story to be spiteful, but at the same time, so that's why I'm giving you the defense. But at the same time, it's extremely frustrating to me. And the defense that churches probably could have made when they didn't hire me was I was a young, not even 30 yet, newbie pastor. with not a lot of administrative experience. Of course, the administrative experience is one of those things that, like, well, you got to start somewhere. And so it's what, and we make the joke of like, oh, to get an entry job, you need 5 years of experience, kind of that kind of thing, which is extremely frustrating to a lot of people my age. But churches do that too. that kind of standard. And we make fun of it in the normal workforce, where an entry job may require you years of experience. And you go, well, how is it an entry job? But besides the point, a lot of churches, they probably viewed me as like some inexperienced little punk wanting to be like a pastor. Like that's kind of silly. Even though to me that was extremely frustrating, because I tried time after time. I had worked at several churches as an intern, and I had done that for years. But none of those internships never really built, well, one, and hindsight's 2020. Part of it is on me as well, where maybe I should have found a way to stick around longer and not just kind of do internships and find ways to be more involved in the churches I was interning at. Even though at the time it was difficult, because one, I was still in school, and two, it was the distance I had to go to some of these places was really difficult. It was like, for instance, one church that I interned at, I used to like take a 2-hour commute. So it would be 4 hours a day going there and back. And it was kind of ridiculous to be at this one church. But basically, as time went by, I kind of got, I hate to say it this way, but I kind of just got jaded. And I got tired of churches behaving that way, not, treating me like some little shit and not taking me seriously in wanting to be a pastor. And so the streaming parse, I was like, I want to find an outlet because I really want to do ministry. Even if I didn't have, even if I didn't get paid. And so I found a day job. And at the time it was security. So I was a security guard for a couple of years. And then I would do the streaming Parson online as a way to do ministry. Because of course the security work was just as a way to make money. And then I would do the ministry somewhere else. And so one of the beauties of doing the streaming Parson ministry was that I could do it from the comfort of my home. As you can see, I'm sitting here comfortably in my nice computer chair. And I could do ministry from the comfort of my home. And it's much more, important now that it's tougher to be in, to have a social gathering kind of thing. That it's way harder because of all the COVID restrictions and stuff like that. And so the streaming Parson was created to do the ministry that I wanted to do, a much more Bible reading focused type of, how do I put it? Discipleship is the Christianese word to put it. And basically when we talk about discipleship, is about how, we spend lots of time really engaging what the Bible says and how to live it out. That's the TLDR of it. And so that was kind of what I wanted to do, was to do a lot of spiritual formation and discipleship training. That's why my approach, when you watch my Bible reading streams, for instance, are the way that they are. That's the approach I take. And so, and I know this is a weird ass tangent, but just bear with me a little bit longer. So, but the truth is, with all that said, and I still have that love to do ministry, which is why this channel exists. At the same time, this channel also, it is born out of a little bit of spite. I'd be a liar if I said that wasn't true. Because truth be told, if miraculously I was given some kind of full-time pastoral job tomorrow, the streaming Parson channel would die. That's the truth of it. If I was all of a sudden full-time pastor, I would just be doing that, and the streaming Parson channel would die. It would no longer be a thing because I would no longer need it. And so, with that said, one of the things. So that's kind of the story of the birth of why the streaming Parson exists. I know I've told this story already, but I just wanted to go. I went over it again, just to give you some context of my more introverted personality. And that's another thing that's great about the streaming Parson channel, whether it's the Bible study or the podcast, or even when I play games on the channel. I can kind of do it in the comfort of my own home in front of my computer. And, you know, I feel pretty relaxed in front of, you know, just sitting here in front of my computer. Because, I mean, growing up, my entire life, I have been the little nerdy kid in front of his computer. I was one of those. Big surprise, right? You wouldn't think that just by looking at me, but maybe if I put on my nerd glasses back on, and of course that wouldn't work right now because I'm wearing contacts, but, you know, put on my nerd glasses back on, and I had my braces again or something, you know, then yeah, you know, you would see the old nerd that was the original Michael Ewan. So, and one of the problems of this, and this is one of those things that, like, I just have to take my lumps with it, but one of the problems of the streaming Parson persona that I have here is that I still get to be the introvert I always was. And it's one of those funny things where it's, you know, you think, huh, a pastor would be more extroverted. You would think that. But that's not true. I mean, pastors can be introverted and extroverted like any other normal person. But of course, there's also the other thing that's kind of a misconception that people have about introverted versus extroverted. The fact of the matter is, even though we tend to lean closer to one more than the other, we do swing back and forth between them because that's just being an ordinary human being. There are times where you want to be more secluded, and there are times where you want to be around people. And human beings, we go back and forth between them. But at the same time, it is also true that we are inclined to swing one way more often than the other. So, sorry, I just need to fix this thing here. Okay. So, with that said, I know I just went on this whole tangent talking about the streaming Parson and what the streaming Parson is about. I just admit that, like, yeah, I'm a introverted nerd that tends to be to myself a lot more often than not. And I know some of you, that might be a shock to a lot of you because, well, when yeah. See, now you're starting to see it because now that I'm self-conscious about it. But sometimes when, for instance, I'm at a social gathering, I do go out of my way to introduce myself to others. And you would think that's a more extroverted quality. An introvert would be more of the kind of person that's, you don't speak till you're spoken to, which may also be a factor in that whole Asian introverted context, because of course part of a lot of Asian cultures is, as if you're a young person, especially in an Asian culture, you don't talk to people, you speak when spoken to, and so the elder of the two speaks first, is how it always is, or the one in the quote unquote higher up in the hierarchy. And so within Asian cultures, for those of you who don't know how it works, there's an inherent kind of hierarchy that exists within people. So since I've been talking about anime, we'll use the Japanese system a little bit, and you'll kind of get what I'm getting at. So in Japanese, when people speak to each other, there's something called honorifics. If you don't know what an honorific is, basically, they're suffixes to people's names and titles. Well, they're basically titles that act as suffixes when you're addressing someone, which makes clear the class dynamic between you and the other person. So, for instance, if I was to talk to someone of my own age, there's a lot of ways I could do it. If I was talking to a peer, I could just call them by their well. In Japan, you usually go last name first. You usually call people by their last name first. You just call each other by the last name. If people call each other by their first names, it means they're really close to each other, like they're best friends or something. But if I was talking to, say, my boss, I would call him. What would I call him? I would call him like. Well, of course he's not Japanese, but his name is his last name is Teian. So he would be either he would probably be Teian-san, even though the funny thing is I'm older than him. I'm older than my boss. So, but the hierarchy exists that since he's my boss, I would still call him Teian-san. And then I would just be called like Ewan or something like that if we were Japanese, but neither of us are. But I'm just kind of use that illustration. But if I were to talk to one of my coworkers, all my coworkers, for the most part, are all younger than me. So I may be tempted to say like Joshua Kun. One of my coworkers' name's Joshua, and he would be Joshua Kun. That would just be the natural way I would speak to him. And the honorific, I added the Kun to it, shows the hierarchy that I am above him. Mainly because of our age. And then the way he would address me, he would either address me as, well, because we're in Canada, we always use first names. So I could be Michael, but he wouldn't add a Kun to it. Because, once again, Kun would put, usually, unless you're a high schooler, people don't call each other like Kun and Kun kind of thing. Or Chan for girls. But he would call me, if he were to be formal, he would call me Ewan-san. And then I would just call him Joshua Kun or something like that. And it would display the relationship dynamic between us, that I am his superior because of my age, in this instance. But of course, once again, this can apply with your workplace, you and your boss, or you, if you're the boss or a supervisor or something, your employees, that kind of dynamic. And so there's that kind of hierarchy thing that's established. And so because of that hierarchy being established, going back to the whole, in Asian cultures, you don't speak unless you're spoken to. In this context, I wouldn't normally just walk up to my boss and say, hey man, what's up? That wouldn't happen. But rather, unless he, when he speaks to me, well, one, the assumption is, since he's my boss and I'm the employee, the assumption is he wants something from me. And so that, we're aware of those kind of things when we talk to people. Whereas when you talk with your friends, that's not the first thing that you think of. You don't think, oh, my boss wants something from me when you're talking to your friends, because obviously your friend isn't your boss. So with that said, this adds on to the Asian introverted kind of dynamic, why that tends to happen, because a young Asian male growing up is just assumed that, oh, I don't talk to people. People talk to me when they want something. And so, even though this is kind of an honor system in Japanese culture, there's a fundamental problem with it. And the fundamental problem, and this is true in Chinese culture as well, I use the Japanese system, but it's really not that different. And one of the fundamental problems with this honorific system is that Asian men grow up and they develop this kind of habit of, they will never initiate the conversation, which where this is going, and the fundamental problem this creates in a lot of Asian Americans. And I say Asian American loosely because technically I'm an Asian Canadian, but that's besides the point. In Asian Americans, this develops this problem of why Asian men are so bad at picking up women. Let's be real, like is true. They're just so bad at picking up women because in the all the developmental 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 years, Asian men have been taught you don't speak unless you're spoken to. And so you develop this habit and this mindset for a long time. And then in North American culture, I mean, yeah, things are different now. But usually, and even though we have feminism to kind of change the dynamic, women typically still expect the man to speak first. So now you have this paradox. Asian men don't speak unless they're spoken to, but yet in North American culture, it's the man who has to initiate. And now you see the problem. And to be fair, I mean, I ran into this problem for the longest time. I would not speak. I would never make a move on a girl because I did not speak to a woman unless I was spoken to. This was definitely true when I was in my high school and my college years, my early college years. I kind of smartened up by the time I started my master's because, you know, I wasn't going to go forever without ever having a girlfriend. So in my earlier years, that's why I didn't know a lot of people in my my develop my college and my high school years because I didn't speak to people unless I was spoken to, and I was very traditional in that sense. And it's one of those things that the funny headbutts with my girlfriend and myself now is that I still act as the traditional one, and this plays into a thing that anime tends to use all the time. Like, you know, once again, I swear I'm an anime character, but another thing that tends to kind of be a, I don't want to say a roadblock. It's not like it's a stumbling block, I guess. It's not like a huge roadblock for Asian males, but basically because of this approach that they have, then that's also why a lot of Asian guys tend to appear a lot more shy, because it's not really because they are shy. I mean, there are a lot of guys that are not, but Asian guys tend to appear that way because it that mindset of not being the first to speak really holds them back. It really does. It holds them back from, you know, being out there and do the whole go-getter, figuratively and literally, I guess, when we're talking about picking up women. And this is also why you get a lot of that whole eroticism mythology of how Asian men tend to be viewed as feminine. And it comes from that because, once again, when you contrast it to, say, black or white cultures, that is not the case at all. If a and you know, this is true for for both black and white cultures, that if men want something, they go get it. And that ambition is an attractive quality, especially when women view it in men. But Asian men are told not to do this. They're told not to be like that because, of course, there's the whole it seems rude. And this is where, once again, one of the awkward pulls and pushes in like North American culture, because in America and in Canada as well, because there's a mixture of cultures, and then you encounter another human being, you don't know what mixtures have occurred within a person. So let's say a guy walks up to a girl, and in the guy's culture, it may be totally acceptable to go up and just speak, be the initiator. But in the woman's culture, it might be rude for the man to do that, although that's only true in like Asian cultures. So that's not the best example. I'm going to use a better one. Well, I'll use a more personal one. and why, for instance, it took me forever to like find a girlfriend kind of thing. So because I was always brought up thinking, oh, I don't speak unless I'm spoken to, and so I never make the move. And so I knew there were a number of girls, and unlike anime protagonists, I'm not a dense motherfucker like a lot of anime protags. I can be pretty sharp when it comes to like, okay, I notice this girl's like into me kind of thing. But at the same time, I would just be too stupid to do anything about it because I would I would be too into myself thinking, oh, but it would be rude if I spoke to her or if I made a move. It would be rude to her. And so I never do it. And then eventually, a girl just gives up. She goes, okay, this guy, he's too stupid to do anything. So I'm gonna go look somewhere else for a guy, kind of thing. And I had made that mistake a couple of times in my life because, oh, I wanted to be polite about it. But then that politeness ended up hurting me more. Of course, when you look at the long, hindsight's 2020, right? So, I mean, I can look at life now and be like, well, I may have dodged bullets with some of these girls, but that's the point. But it is a real problem. It is a real problem for a lot of Asian guys. And so, maybe in a future stream after Valentine's, though. So, you're out of luck for lessons, I guess, fellas. If you want advice on how to talk to women, you can ask me for a bit of help because I'm pretty good at it now. I wouldn't say I was back then, but to be fair, if you were talking to me like when I was 25, when I was 25, I was still bad. So I mean, I only like when I say I'm good at talking to women now, that's only because like I have a lot more life experience, and so I know what to do in a lot of situations because I've been through life long enough and I've had to figure out a lot of stuff myself. But going back to the anime tropes, that's why, and it feels that male fantasy, and this is where I relate to on some level to a lot of these kind of shonen stories of the guy being kind of shy and introverted, but then he meets the extroverted female, and it's one of those things where like God must have a sense of humor to do this to me because my girlfriend is kind of like that. She is the extroverted. She's loud. That you think, well, Michael, you're pretty loud. You can talk for like an hour straight to a camera on like a bajillion different things. Clearly, you're loud. But that's not what I mean when I say like being loud. When I say like being loud, she's the kind of person that when she enters a room, she enters the room. She'll be talking loudly with her friends or whatever, or talking to me about something. When the two of us are together, and people know when she enters a room. Whereas like I could easily sneak up on people because I don't open my mouth often, and maybe that's the inner ninja in me or something. But for it, like that, those are two things where we're clearly opposite. And anime uses this trope, and a lot of stories tend to use this trope, not just anime, but anime tends to use it a lot more often because, I mean, once again, anime will tell the same story. Like Japanese storytellers will tell the same story over and over. But the opposites attract story also works pretty well, and this is also true in my own life. That I just use the me being quiet and my girlfriend being loud as one example, but there's a lot of other things where we're quite opposite from each other. So, for instance, one of the things, and this is where a little bit of dating advice for some of you watching this and you want a little bit of dating advice. Something that my girlfriend and I had to learn was we had to learn how to adjust or to schedule rather date nights where we alternate between what either of us really wants to do. And so, and this is one of those things that in anime they use opposites attract because it naturally creates tension and conflict in the story. In real life, it's one of those things that like you have to be sharp, catch that if you are an opposite to, you know, your partner, you have to catch where you are opposite and then find the compromise. Or else you're going to run into all kinds of problems. And so something that my girlfriend and I sort of figured out was on we would alternate between various date nights of doing something that's more introverted, something that I would be into, or do something a lot more extroverted, something she would be into. So my girlfriend's good idea, her idea of a good time, sorry, good idea, uh, her idea of a good time is, well, unfortunately, this has been reduced quite a bit because, you know, COVID, but she's the kind of person who would want to go out on the town. She wants to go walk down a street, talk to people, random strangers, us hit up different snack booths, and not actually have like a dinner, but like, oh, let's hit this place and then hit that place and go down the street and have different fruits in different places and just go about the town. Sometimes she wants to go like dancing or something. So we'll go to a dance floor club kind of place. We'll do that. We do karaoke. And it's one of those funny things where, with that said, to focus on the karaoke bit a little bit, one of those things when once again, this is also one of those boy meets girl story and the girl awakens stuff within a guy and vice versa. You also learn that you have talents you don't have when you spend time with people who are different from you. That's kind of a duh. But I'm actually pretty good at memorizing songs and singing them. I'm not going to sing for you right now because my singing voice is generally terrible. I don't have a good singing voice, but I'm actually really good at memorizing songs and then be able to sing them back to people. And so we would do karaoke nights, and I learned that I actually learned that I can have a good time at them, but they're not my idea of a date night. That's not my idea of fun. And now when you hear what my idea of fun is, most of you extroverts will think like, this is you're so boring, Michael. But my idea of a good time on a date night would be like, I just want to sit in a coffee shop and just talk. I can be in a coffee shop and just talk. We could just talk for like 2 hours in a coffee shop, and in my mind, that's a good time. My idea of a good time is, hey, let's like let's just go to like one of each other's like houses and just watch TV. Like that's my idea of a good time. Because I guess I'm an indoor person like that. I'm a person who I'm a lot more introverted like that. Whereas she's not. And so anime tends to use this trope quite a bit because it's an easy way to create conflict, and it's an easy way to have characters be more introspective and self-reflective. Because of course when you have those opposites conflict, then then people have to really view themselves and say, oh, what kind of person am I really? And what am I capable of? And so that's something that I don't know, I thought was really interesting as I had learned in my dating life. And it's something that, like, once again, it's easy to like see how cartoon characters figure it out, and then the real question is how you apply it to your own life. And I think that's one of the beauties of why in like Japanese culture, for instance, in their manga and anime culture, they're okay with telling the same story, because the nuances within that story is how different people apply it. But the story itself it's banal to human nature. And I talked about this last week quite a bit, where there's that banality of human nature. And that's why you can't really change the story with more progressive ideas, saying, well, a bunch of guys living together wouldn't be a bunch of slobs. But if you rewrite history that way, then you lose that. You lose that part of the story. You lose that part of the human experience. Because not everybody, the average person may not be as. Let me put it this way. So, like with the Seven Dwarves, going back to the Seven Dwarves story, with the Seven Dwarves, look, the seven guys, it's just easier to make them all like stereotypical guys as opposed to trying to say like, well, every single one of them is nuanced and they're all different. But the fact of the matter is that they're really not that different. And sure, we have seven guys and they have their little quirks, Dopey being kind of the stupid one of the group, and Grumpy always being angry. But fundamentally, they're just different facets of male behavior, and introverted male behavior rather. And once again, the Snow and the Seven Dwarves also has that, the guy being introverted and the girl being extroverted. Which is why it was so easy to relate Snow White and the Seven Dwarves to My Dress Up Darling, because My Dress Up Darling is exactly that. Gojo, the guy, he's very to himself, and part of that is because of the trauma of having one person say that his love for Hina dolls is disgusting. And so that's why he's so, self-absorbed and really into himself. Whereas Kitagawa, she's in her extroverted nature comes from her appreciating others and somewhat being an enabler of other people and their passions. And so in My Dress Up Darling, what happens is she awakens within him that he can be reliable, and that his love for Hina dolls and his ability to make clothes, there's so much he can do with that. Of course, what she has to grow out of is to not think of it in such a selfish way, because of course in the story it starts with her wanting him to make her clothes. And so in a way that's a very selfish request, to expect a guy to just make you a whole bunch of your cosplay outfits, because of course typical cosplayers in the real world, most of them actually do a lot of their own work. They actually make a lot of their own clothes. And there's a good reason for that, because it's expensive if you hire someone all the time to do it. And it's also a good and also when cosplayers make their own costumes, it adds so much more to the ability to cosplay. And so I remember like back when, this is how old I am, when cosplaying started becoming more popular, and it's actually been popular a lot longer than people think it has been. It's been popular since the early 2000s. It just hasn't blown up like it has in, just before 2010. And that's because, the internet wasn't as big as it was back then. Social media wasn't as big as it was back then. But cosplaying was definitely, even before the early 2000s, but I think cosplaying did become a lot more of a phenomenon in the early 2000s. And back then, one of the major criticisms when people were saying like, oh, you're a cosplayer, like cosplaying is a thing, it's just a bunch of these talentless women, most of the cosplayers were women, these talentless women just want to show off their bodies and whatever. And that was the criticism in cosplay back then. But as time progressed, we learned the reality that like, no, these women were passionate about what they were doing, and they put a lot of time, and they had a lot of skill, and their skill in making clothes, and it really made it like they owned cosplaying, if that makes sense, when they make their clothes. And so sorry, I lost the train of thought for a second. And what this had to do with My Dress Up Darling. So with cosplay, there's that interesting dimension of the cosplayer being a lot more independent. But in the boy meets girl story in My Dress Up Darling, because it's a boy meet girl story, you can't show just any one of them being truly independent. So the story revolves around how they need each other, and that's how most love stories kind of really go, right? The main couple, if you will, they learn how much they need each other. And so in the first arc of My Dress Up Darling, which the anime I think is basically done the first arc. The first arc of the story, because I've read the manga too. Loved it. I'm one of those. I'm also like, this is part of my whole like introverted nature coming out. Just on a side note, but I'm the kind of guy who would like, if I find a manga and I like it, I'm gonna binge the whole thing. I'm gonna start from chapter 1 and go all the way to the current chapter. I'm one of those people. And yeah, one of the worst things about reading manga is like, sweet, I just read 70 chapters, and then I'm like, crap. Now there's no more to read, and I have to wait I have to wait a month at a time sometimes for the next chapter. Waiting a month for 10 minutes of entertainment. Oh, being a manga reader is terrible sometimes, I swear. But anyway, the first arc of My Dress Up Darling, I think the anime just finished it. I haven't watched the 5th episode yet. But basically, in the first arc, they agree. So Gojo agrees to make her a cosplay outfit. And it's one of this character that Kitagawa really likes. And so he makes her this outfit, and they go to a con together, a cosplay convention. Although it's not like a major one. It's just like a cosplay event, I should just say. Because, of course, in Japanese culture, cosplay events happen all the time. Speaking of cosplay events, though, one of the things that I wish I spent way more time on when I was in Japan is one of those things I kind of like. I regret not planning this out way more. But in Akihabara, there's like cosplay events there like all the time. And I kind of wish that like I managed to. I wish I was able to spend a lot of time and go to a cosplay event, even though I myself would not be cosplaying as a tourist. But I would have loved to have gone to one and got to see people in their different outfits and just that people really enjoy cosplay and stuff like that. And so it's one of those things that like, yeah, I kind of wish I did that more. But anyway, in My Dress Up Darling, they go to a cosplay event, and this was after Gojo has his like epiphany, because at first he's really stressed out. His grandfather's in the hospital, or not in the hospital. His grandfather's being taken care of because he had injured himself, but he goes back and forth between the hospital, and then he also has like exams because it's a high school story, so he has exams. And Gojo is just like, I don't know if I can actually fulfill my promise to Kitagawa. I don't know if I can make this costume, whatever. And then he pulls like an all-nighter and pulls it off. Because anime, right? So, because anime. And then, in that epiphany, he realizes that he can be someone that's reliable. He's not someone that's useless and disgusting, like he was traumatized in the past. And so Kitagawa, in her kind of selfish plea of him making her a cosplay outfit, he that part of the provider part of his masculinity, and it's one of those things that like, once again, this is where this is one of the beauties of this kind of story, because it manages to not just be like, quote unquote, all about brute force with a guy, but rather, hit Gojo being a provider, if you will, doesn't have to come through brute force, but rather it's through making clothes, a traditionally female activity. Though once again, we live in 2022. That's not always the case, and of course, the top clothing designers in the world are all men. So there's that too. But anyway, with Gojo, he learns that he can be reliable, and he becomes her provider in a sense. And the story, as the manga continues, he is her provider, quote unquote, as he makes more cosplay outfits. Because of course, you can't have it just end with one. But he ends up being her provider. But of course, because as he is her provider, he awakens parts of Kitagawa's femininity. Of course, there's the whole like, yeah, she's a sexualized character and she's a model, so I don't mean in that sense, but in the sense of being emotionally vulnerable and to show real compassion, and her shift from being kind of more selfish, because of course her original desire to be a cosplayer is a little bit selfish, but she learns to be more compassionate and to be more loving and all that. And it starts with her. She's the one who actually has a crush on him first, and that's usually how it is with the boy meets girl story. And usually it is the extroverted person who displays the romantic feelings a lot earlier. This is also true in my own life. My my girlfriend Mariah, I might as well name drop at this point. Mariah, she was the one who admitted her feelings to me first. Like, sure, I had like moments where like, yeah, I liked her, but I was too much of chicken shit to do anything about it. Because one part of it was because I had tried to date other girls and all of those went south. I've had other attempts at relationships and they went south. And so I kind of was in the same boat as Gojo. And now you get into that weird transition into like how another reason why I might as well say it now. Another reason why my Dress Up Darling is just one, it's just a good anime, and I'm not the only one who probably thinks this, but I'm sure a lot of guys, mine, save for the fan service because that's obviously there too. But I think a lot of guys can relate to Gojo on that very deep level, and they know exactly what he's gone through. To have all these certain failures in your past, and you allow those failures to hold you back. And I think the way that My Dress Up Darling deals with this kind of story is why it's so good and why it's so popular. I mean, right now, My Dress Up Darling easily hits top 10 of 2022. So, and we'll see if it stays there. But one of the things that makes Gojo so relatable is like a lot of guys can relate to that. They can relate to how past traumas and past failures can really hold you back as a person, and that search for someone to pull you out of that. And that's kind of going back with My Dress Up Darling. That's exactly what Kitagawa does, because she's so accepting, almost to a fault, but she's so accepting of other people and their hobbies and their passions that she's borderlining an enabler. Which, I mean, that's the idea of being compassionate to a fault, which is something that all of us have to watch out for. Maybe that'll be its own stream in the future. But I mean, that's what every guy looks for, and that's what every guy, that's why the guy needs to meet the girl who has that compassion and can show that to him. Because guys, definitely introverted guys, are so quick to find the smallest things and allow that to hold them back. And of course, that's a theme that goes throughout the in My Dress Up Darling, is that Gojo is afraid that someone else might say he's disgusting or whatever because of his love for Hina dolls and whatever. Someone else is gonna say he's disgusting, but of course, spoilers if you haven't read the manga. But basically, that doesn't happen. People don't think he's disgusting. Some people may question what he does, but they don't think he's like gross or anything. They go like, "Oh, actually, that's kind of cool that you can do that." And so that's something all guys could learn a lot from, and I think that's why I think I definitely recommend the anime. I mean, yeah, there's some moments where it can be a little tasteless in its fan service, but you just gotta take your lumps, I guess. And I know there'll be people watching this is like, what, this a pastor watching like such a fan servicey anime? It's like, dude, like, give it a rest. But maybe I'm just a terrible person in the end of the day. Who knows? But I think one of the things that, I mean, that's why I love the story so much, because I actually relate to Gojo on that deeper level. And Mariah's like, yeah, she's definitely Kitagawa, and we definitely see ourselves in this anime. But I mean, it's not just that one. I could name other like, and this is one of those funny things is like, as an adult, oddly enough, especially when I got back into anime, because it's one of those funny things. I might just, because I've been talking about anime so much today. I got back. Okay, so I loved anime as a kid and as a teenager, but in my early college years, I kind of stopped I wasn't into it as much anymore. I figured like, oh, I just didn't really want to watch as much when I was in early college. And then even in my for like the first part of my uh like the first half of my master's degree. So it wasn't until like my late 20s actually, because I graduated with my master's at the age of 29. So it's probably when I was like 27 or 28. Then I got back into anime. And when I got back into anime, I didn't watch the stuff I was into as a kid. You know, when you're a kid and a teenager, you're into like stuff like Dragon Ball, Naruto, and stuff like that. And those things they're pretty good. And I loved them back then. And you know, maybe I'll rewatch some of the older Naruto stuff because I know the old stuff was pretty good. Then it kind of went downhill. But I mean, anything that's lived too long, that will tend to happen. But as an adult, the animes that I watch now are all like rom-coms. Why do I love Japanese rom-coms? I don't know. I guess I'm weird like that. But I don't think I'm the only one. It's kind of like, and then this is where I relate to Gojo, right? It's like, well, I'm into stuff that's traditionally like, oh, that's more associated with girls. Because girls would be more into rom-coms, right? That's what you think. But as an adult, it's just like, well, you just stop caring. Which is why the My Dress Up Darling, the idea is so profound because you wouldn't think this with high schoolers. You wouldn't expect someone to be like Kitagawa as a high schooler. Maybe as a 30-year-old adult, it's totally different. But as a, what are they, like 15 in that show? They're like, you wouldn't expect a 15-year-old to act that way. And that's where, like, once again, you know, anime, you have to suspend some disbelief. But in the grand scheme of things, I think that kind of dynamic is something that all people really need. All people really need that. And you know, and it's not, and this is the reason why anime is willing to abuse this story trope because it's so true in real life. And you know, I know there's lots of rhetoric about how, well, you know, not all boys and girls, you know, there's no unilateral framework for boys and there's no unilateral framework for girls, and duh. But at the same time, there's something that makes there is something within the male experience and something within the female experience that is definitely somewhat unilateral, and it transcends culture, it transcends time, and thus why, you know, referring back to the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs podcast, that's why the stories are told the way that they are and why they last through time, is because it just retells a tale as old as time. And you know, in the case of My Dress Up Darling, it's when, you know, a man and a woman, even though yes, they're technically high schoolers, a man and a woman learn that they need each other. And now to make this weird transition, because I think I'm done talking about anime for now. But to make the weird ass transition to why we celebrate, you know, as hallmarky and how much, you know, commercialism that is in Valentine's nowadays. There's a reason why we celebrate, you know, romance, quote unquote, in a sense. And that's because, you know, it's the actualization of that tale as old as time, is, you know, and yeah, there are some exceptions to the rule, but fundamentally the why men and women need each other. And we see that, we celebrate that in Valentine's Day. Yeah, sure, you know, a lot of hallmarky crap, and I can give you advice on how to not screw up your Valentine's Day, but because you know, maybe I'll tell a little bit after I make this point, but we celebrate that you know, that we need each other. You know, you and your partner need each other, kind of thing, and that's, you know, my partner and I will do that too. We celebrate why we need each other and how we make each other better people and all that stuff. And so that's the beauty of Valentine's Day. That's what you should get out of it. You know, I just not to reference an even older podcast, but I always talk about how, like, whether it's Halloween or Christmas, Easter or whatever, a fundamental part of any festival or holiday or whatever, it's just a perfect reminder for people that as we do our own thing in life, you need to be reminded of how much we need each other as a community and as people. And I think one of the beauties of Valentine's Day is that you can make that you make that circle so small to an exclusivity between you and your partner. And you're reminded why you need each other on that much deeper level. That, yeah, community gives a bit of that, but not on the intimate level that Valentine's allows you. You know, that one-on-one exclusive relationship with your partner. And that's something that should be celebrated, and that's something that when we watch, you know, when you're watching like rom-coms and stuff like that, and I obviously think of this because, like, well, I'm watching rom-coms and stuff like that, and they play on this theme all the time, is that it is when we acknowledge how much we need that other person and what they awaken within us and how much we appreciate them for that. That's always something worth celebrating and to express your love for. Maybe I'll go another tirade, but not today, but about how other animes do the same story. Because, I mean, I did focus on My Dress Up Darling, but, like, you can think of so many rom-com animes that do this, right? Like, I'm trying to think of some easy examples. I know the one I always go back to is, like, Quintessential Quintuplets does the exact same thing, except it, once again, does something similar to Snow and the Seven Dwarfs, where it's one of the genders has multiple people in it, and that's typical how harem animes go. But basically, you know, Futaru is your introverted, overly self-conscious, and then you have the quintuplets, right? And they're all extroverted for the most part, except for Miku. But the rest of them are all pretty extroverted, and they draw out, you know, Futaru being reliable and being a man in his reliability. You know, this is true in a lot of. I'm trying to think of other, like, rom-coms off the top of my head. Tonakawa actually flips this, actually, to an extent, where the female shows that no, that's not the one that flips it. I guess the weird one about that one is that the female is the one who's also reliable, but then the guy's still, like, the introverted nerd, and she awakens, you know, some masculine properties within himself. But of course, the other thing too that he awakens within her is to be willing to accept. And that's another theme about, you know, guys need to learn to accept things, and that's a big part of the boy meets girl. The girl usually teaches the guy how to accept parts of his life or whatever. And so Tonakawa kind of is weird like that. But once again, you know, you can make variations and play around with stuff like that. But those fundamental elements are still there. But anyway, that's it for talking about rom-coms and love story stuff, because, you know, I'm a sucker for love stories, especially as you get older. And one of the things that I think one of the other things too, you know, I told that little story about, like, the kind of anime I was into when I was a kid versus the stuff I'm into now. I think one of the other things too, and I remember seeing this old Facebook post. I wouldn't be able to whip it up for you, and I wouldn't do it anyway because I don't want to get in trouble for using someone else's meme. But basically, the meme goes, when I was a kid reading Lord of the Rings, I wish I was an elf who could, you know, kick some ass and be awesome. But as an adult, I wish I was a hobbit, you know, just living in the Shire in peace. And it's one of those things too, is like, yeah, I relate. I relate. And so, as an adult, I think why rom-coms appeal to me is because it's like, oh yeah, you know, that's simple. This life is simpler, and the story is simpler. You know, you don't have to live in some kind of fantastical world to find fulfillment. You just have to find fulfillment in the everyday. And that's one of the other things too that's important about stuff like, say, celebrating Valentine's Day. You know, yeah, it's the one day in the year where like people make a big deal out of like the ridiculous expensive date, but it's like at the same time it's like you've been dating someone long enough, like I have, or you know, you could ask any married couple. And here's a little tip to some of you younger guys that, you know, don't have experience in the dating world. You know, it's about the little. You got to make her appreciate the little crappy things that you do. And the real trick of dating is to use those things and let that rack you points in her book. You know, do the little things that will impress her. Doesn't have to. You don't have to do the big things. I mean, the big things help, but don't get too fixated on the big things by sacrificing the little things. But it's the little things that are a lot more helpful. For instance, with my girlfriend, a trick is I give her flowers very often, but I don't like buy big bouquets because that would get expensive fast. Instead, what I do is I buy a single flower, and in a like let's say like in a course of a week, I will give her a flower every day in that week. And so each time, see, in her mind, see, this is the trick. And this is where guys always screw it up. Guy thinks, well, I'll just go, you know, huge bouquet. And this will rack me up a lot of points. Because she'll be like, wow, he really thinks about me, but like, he really loves me with this huge bouquet of flowers. That's what guys think. But no, guys are wrong here. The trick is, see, in her psyche and her, you know, what's that word I'm thinking of? With her endorphins, the endorphin output is almost exactly the same, where I show her with a big bouquet of flowers, boom, she'll be like, oh my gosh, flowers! Ding! 1 point. But if I give her one flower, the endorphin amount is almost the same. Oh my gosh, he gave me a flower. Ding! 1 point. So the trick is, instead of going big bouquet of flower for 1 point, I do 7 flowers throughout the week. And each time I do it, I get a point. So in that week, I made 7 points from the flowers alone, as opposed to 1 bouquet, which the 1 bouquet, which then she just gets 1 point. Another little secret too of why it makes it's actually one. Not only is it more economic sense, but you can also like have her fawn over the flowers you buy her in the course of a week. Here's a little trick, guys. Here's a little trick. I'll tell you a secret. So what I've also caught when I do this is that she'll kind of play around with an arrangement of how the 7 flowers fit together in a vase. Because if you get a bouquet, you just put the whole bouquet in whatever, right? You're done. But if you buy her separate flowers, she adds it onto the vase set, and then she makes an arrangement out of it. And as she does that, subconsciously, she's actually really, you know, thinking a lot more about what you've done, which adds points to you. So that's like mega brain strats right there. That's mega brain strats. And I've seen her do this. Where it's like you have. And another trick too is that you get 7 different kinds as well. You get 7 different kinds of flowers, and the way she arranges them into the vase really it shows you a little bit about. And this is where, okay, maybe this may not be the best piece of advice, because maybe this is me being like super nerdy, and it's weird to explain this. Like, I'm sure an introvert, if there's another introverted person here, they know what I'm talking about. But in a way, I can see her thought process when I see the way she arranges the 7 flowers that I've given her in a week, per se, and the way she'll rearrange them. And once again, if she rearranges them, it brings that back into her mind, that like, oh, Michael gave me these 7 flowers kind of thing. It's genius. And so that's a little trick. And I mean, ladies in the room, let me ask you, would you rather have a guy give you one bouquet once, or would you appreciate a guy who gave you a dozen roses in 12 separate days? You probably pick the latter, because once again, the endorphins kick in each time, and secondly, I think one of the problems with the bouquet system, not that I'm against bouquets exactly, but I think that as a poor man myself, the trick is to be economic with like doing the 7 flower thing, and the bouquet thing really limits you on what you can buy. I mean, yeah, because once again, if you want to go like a custom set in your bouquet, you gotta fork out money for that, and that can get expensive. But the trick I use is like I buy, and I mean I use the 7 flowers as like an example. I actually buy her flowers way more often. I almost buy a flower almost every day, and I give her 1 flower, or 2 flowers on the off day. But I usually give her like 1 flower every day, and then she'll just kind of put them into the vase, and she'll rearrange them every time she gets a new one. And the continual going back to the flowers for her, one, it gets her thinking about me a lot more, which is a win for me. See, fellas, you can make this work for you. Sorry, ladies, I'm also letting out all your secrets. But another trick that I use, aside from the flower one, here's a fun trick, guys, of how to make your dating life so much better. Which I have utilized this already. But let's say you're gonna plan a date for Valentine's Day. Although, you guys only got a week, so you guys gotta be quick on this one. And this doesn't really this method I use does not work if you're like asking a girl for the first time on Valentine's Day, which is usually not a good idea anyway. You don't want to ask a girl out and have your first date be on Valentine's Day. That's usually a really bad idea. But for a lot of you guys already in relationships, and even in marriage, this works like a freaking charm, dude. So especially for you guys that are married and have kids, I'll tell you a little secret that works like a freaking magic charm, dude. So, and I'll kind of mention why I'm not going to be streaming next week. It's because, let's say, we're going out on Valentine's Day. My girlfriend and I are going out next week. So what I did was I made the reservation 2 weeks in advance. I made this reservation last week. I made the reservation 2 weeks in advance. Had the reservation made, planned out other stuff, stuff to take care of my brother, whatever. I planned out all that. And then after I've done all that, I called her and I told her what I did. Now most guys, you think, oh no, I'm going to surprise her on Valentine's Day. No, you amateur. Surprise her. Never try and surprise a woman. So, anyway, I told her what I did. And she gets super excited. She's like, oh, awesome. Oh my gosh, like, that's amazing. We're going to go on Valentine's Day. You've set it up? Yep. Reservation means we're in. So, I don't have to worry about, like, trying to figure out something to do on Valentine's Day. No, we have a plan. She knows the plan. And so she knows what's going down. And see, here's the thing. Here's a little trick, fellas. See, when you tell her beforehand, now she's thinking about what you've done, and she's going to think about what you're going to do. And so every time she thinks about it, ding, you get a point. You get a point every time she thinks about it. And, because, well, in my case, it may not be true with your woman, but if you learn anything from the rest of this podcast and all the anime references I've been making, usually women like to talk because they're loud. I know there's no nice way of putting that, but they're loud. And that means they're going to talk. And every time Mariah brings up, hey, girls, you know what Michael and I are going to do on Valentine's Day? We're going to do this, this, and that. And it's going to be awesome. We're going to have a grand old time. Every time she tells that story, boom, I just got a point. And then, of course, it works like a double-edged sword. Because then every time she tells those other girls what I'm going to do, that's a -1 for all those other suckers who haven't done anything. So, right? Like, I'm just raking in the points. Like, this is where you get top tier human right here, right? There's a little secret, guys. I'll just tell you now. I know there's only a week left before Valentine's, so some of you married guys that want to make plans for Valentine's Day, plan it, make your reservation, hire the babysitter in advance, get it all sorted out, and then when you do that, after you've done it, you tell your girlfriend or your wife what you've done, and she will think about it nonstop, and it just makes you look way better. It works like a charm, dude. Like I don't know why I never came up with this when I was younger. I was like, dude, this is so brilliant, and it makes me look awesome. Because when I've met like some of my when I've met her friends' boyfriends, they all view me like I'm a freaking Chad because of like man, everyone like my girlfriend also talks about how awesome you are. What is your secret, dude? I'm like, dude, like life experience is one of them. But like, I'm telling you, it's like it's genius. You know, you gotta make a brain plays. It's like you gotta make a brain plays, and so that's also why I'm not here next week, because you know I planned it 2 weeks in advance, so we're gonna be having a grand old time. It's gonna be great. So those of you guys who haven't planned anything yet, you better get on it. And the trick is you tell her what you've done as soon as you've done it. Then as she thinks about it, it makes you look way better. And that is always a good idea. Anyway, that's enough rambling from me today. I just wanted to tell some funny love story related things. Although I ended up talking about anime mostly, but that's because, well, anime rom-coms are good. That's the TLDR of today's stream. Anime rom-coms are good. And I really like them. And I relate to them on like a spiritual level almost. But anyway, okay, I'm going to just talk over this because it's the end of the stream anyway. So just some quick housekeeping. I'm not sure what Shining and I are going to do on Wednesday. Keep your eyes peeled at 3 o'clock, assuming we do anything. Because, once again, I got to talk to him about what we're doing. Because I don't know what we're doing. So, yeah. That's, we'll see what Shining and I do on Wednesday at 3 o'clock Pacific time. Once again, no promises. Because, one, I got to talk to Shining. I haven't talked to him since Sunday, I think. Well, actually, it was yesterday. But we were co-hosting another stream. So, we didn't have time for us to do business. But we'll see if we do anything on Wednesday. If we do, keep your eyes peeled at 3 p.m. on Wednesday. Thursday, we have more Throwback Thursday, Heroes of Might and Magic 2, The Price of Loyalty. And then Friday, we will finish off this week with reading Luke 11 and 12 in our Bible reading streams. So with that said, that's it for housekeeping. That's it for the announcements. I hope you guys have a great week. I will see you guys for sure Thursday for Throwback Thursday. We'll see if I show up on Wednesday. I want to do something on Wednesday, but once again, I'm kind of clueless for Wednesday. But maybe after this stream, I'll go harass Shiny and we'll find something out. So, with that said, I'll see you guys later this week. Thursday for sure. We'll see you on Wednesday. But with that being said, you guys have a great rest of your week. Have a great night, and God bless you.